A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus was teaching in the temple, and a large crowd was listening to him. He said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearances say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." The Gospel of the Lord. Generosity is a very tricky thing in a culture defined by independence. We're tempted to focus on our responsibility of taking care of our own needs and the needs of those closest to us. Whilst we might not match the confidence and complete selflessness of the 2 widows and their trust in God, we can certainly keep growing in our desire to give much, much more than we take. There are a couple of lines that really pinpoint the issue in the Gospel. Jesus says, "Beware of the scribes. They devour the houses of widows," and as a pretext, lengthy prayers. And then, "This poor widow from her poverty has contributed all she had." Things are clearly not always what they appear. The scribes were offering long and complex prayers, but according to our Lord, the purpose of their prayers was really not praise of God or to exercise God's values of justice, charity, and mercy, but as a disguise in order to allow them to more readily gobble up others' wealth or what little they had. That's really tragic and shocking. And then in the Gospel, Jesus points out the poor widow's offerings. He commends her because her very, very small offering was an act of extraordinarily profound generosity. She gave from her livelihood rather than her surplus, and she gave what was to others virtually nothing, but to her was everything. So people wouldn't have even noticed how profound this act was. It was for God alone, and God saw it in Jesus. To give from our livelihood is not only an act of generosity, but it's an extraordinary act of trust in God. We can only give from our need if we trust that God will provide for us everything that is really lasting. Or if we identify with others' needs as interconnected with our own destiny, for they too are our brothers and sisters, then we will reach out to help others in their need, even from our poverty. Jesus himself demonstrates the ultimate example of this complete generosity and commitment as he gives us everything. He sacrifices all to save us. He holds nothing back. Even his life is given for us on the cross. God giving his life for us. God who did not need to suffer, who could have avoided it, but did not, to save us. Jesus recognizes the absolute faith and commitment shown by the poor widow, both of them in the first and the Gospel, as compared with the others who seem to be giving enormous amounts. It's a real eye-opener. The people who are most consistent with the values and actions of Jesus' good news are not always the ones most noticeable. It has been observed in the past, and I believe it, that the greatest contributors to worthy charities, to people in need, to the missions, all these wonderful projects that help other people, are the mum and dad givers, the ordinary people who are giving what they can to people who are less fortunate than ourselves. We know we're comparatively better off, but we're not certainly the most wealthy. The ones who are giving the most in terms of total dedication to Jesus' values are often not the ones who are most visible. And today's gospel reminds us it's possible to be appearing to be doing enough and giving enough, but only God sees straight into the human heart and truly knows what we are capable of. God knows. Jesus knows the circumstances of each of our lives and values, and rejoices in all that is done with what we have, irrespective of how much it amounts to in quantity or by comparison with others. Jesus sits watching as many people come by and donate in the temple. It's extraordinary in this beautiful gospel. We're told Jesus sits and watches as people come by and donate to the temple treasury. To the people of Israel, donating to the temple treasury was considered to be giving donations to God. Jesus is seeing what anyone else could see, or more precisely, anyone else could notice what Jesus saw if they were really looking. But only our Lord seems to see what's really happening. There's a surprising contrast in this incident. There are those whose lives are publicly dedicated to serving God, but in actual fact they're not entirely committed to God. In essence, despite their grand show, they're holding a lot of things back. They have a lot of money and worldly possessions, and they're giving generously, but our Lord perceives that they're only giving from their excess, from what they can well spare to give, whilst still having plenty left. They keep a lot more for themselves. They're not completely dedicated to the cause. They're saving most of their possessions for themselves, or for a rainy day. But how much does one need for a rainy day? That's like asking how long is a piece of string. So they keep most of what they have for themselves. They find many excuses, good and bad, to refuse to use it for the good of others. They trust only in their own resources and not God's providence, and they put their potential future needs before the real and actual needs of those right in front of them, if they bothered to notice. It's all very well for me saying I'm going to save something for a rainy day, but meanwhile I'm looking at someone who's absolutely being poured on. Their rainy day is now, and there's no time to be lost. And then there's this poor widow who's in actual need and has very little to live on, but she's utterly committed to God's vision. She has invested and trusted in God's kingdom completely and is willing to invest her trust and her time and treasure, in fact her last penny, to God's kingdom. If everyone did that throughout the whole world, there would be no poverty, no one going without the basics of life, while others hoard more and more than their fair share for a rainy day that may never arrive. Jesus is not teaching us to be reckless or irresponsible, but he is asking us, inviting us with love to commit ourselves totally to the vision of the kingdom here and now. We're again invited to look well beyond appearances, not to judge by outward appearances, but to trust in God's providence, to not hold back our gifts, talents, and generosity. And we need to get rid of measuring the value of things in terms of quantity or by comparing ourselves to others, and focus more on quality and intention. We again realize from this gospel not to judge by earthly standards, to give from the heart, and realize that everyone may be giving as much as they can, even if it doesn't seem like a lot in comparison to others. We cannot see into others' hearts and minds. And all of us are called to respond in trust, with generosity, in a non-judgmental way, and above all with love, to give 100% to the values and person of Christ. And also the other beautiful thing is Jesus really cares. He invites us to have that same attitude always. Our Lord notices the people around him and the meaning of their actions, no matter how small it seems. He sees beyond mere appearances and sees what's real, and he loves it, and he thanks the Father for it. Jesus not only notices the unobtrusive and humble lady, he also notices that this lady has actually handed in everything she had. Therefore, the most generous person to have donated that day, and most people would not have realized it, and even when he pointed it out, they would have said, "How can that be? She's hardly given anything." Meanwhile, almost everyone else not only didn't realize the profound generosity of this humble lady, but they didn't notice the injustice of the system that doesn't care about the needs of people like this, nor do anything to help them. If this system was working according to God's desire, the money that people had been contributing to the temple would have been given to God's beloved people precisely like her who were in need. Meanwhile, people probably didn't even notice her at all. But our Lord did.